They said some doors inside Buckingham Palace were never meant to be opened. But one night, a royal guard broke that rule. He forced open Queen Camilla's private wardrobe and found something that should have been buried with history itself. Wrapped in velvet, hidden for decades, was the late Queen's original coronation robe. Why was it there? Who put it there? And what truth was the crown so desperate to keep locked away? This isn't just a discovery. It's the one secret the palace never wanted you to hear. The palace had a way of holding its breath after midnight. Corridors that hosted 1,000 footsteps by day became canals for silence. Portraits sank deeper into their frames. Clocks tried to tick quietly so as not to give themselves away. In the East Corridor, where the carpets were too soft to be trusted and the sconces were made to imitate candlelight, a single guard moved without the theater of ceremony. No clatter, no flourish, just duty, disciplining muscle. Sergeant Thomas Avery had marched parades and manned gates in rain that invented new words for cold, but he had never been in this part of the residence after hours. He wore the dark service rig, not the scarlet pageantry people photographed, and the holster at his side felt heavier than usual, as if it too disapproved. He carried a small steel case in his left hand, the kind used for portable evidence kits or dignified emergencies, and in his right a folded sheet of paper already creased to softness by reconsideration. The instruction was short. Proceed to the Queen Consort's private dressing suite. Verify the integrity of the wardrobe. It was not on any rotation he knew. It bore no seal and no signature, only an internal code that looked correct enough to discourage questions and wrong enough to encourage them. He had asked one anyway. The duty officer at the console had glanced up, clocklight in his eyes. "Came down from resident security," he said, which was a way of saying, "Don't be clever. They'll be grateful if you're quick." Avery did not believe in gratitude that arrived with a clock attached. Anyway, he moved. The door to the suite guarded itself with expensive quiet. He checked the corridor once more, pressed his ear to the panel, not because he expected noise, but because ritual was a finer shield than rank, and slipped inside. Perfume lives longer than people in rooms like this. It had settled into the silk, the wallpaper, the grain of the mirrored vanity. The air was 5 degrees colder than the hall, a refrigeration of luxury. Lamps on low dimmers made islands of warmth on polished wood. He stood a moment to let his eyes edit the shadows into furniture. The wardrobe stood against the far wall, taller than it needed to be, older than the other pieces, a survivor with opinions. It had the lines of a chapel and the hinges of a secret. He approached it like a boarder. The note in his pocket had used the words "structural check," which made as much sense as calling a prayer a fire drill. He set the steel case on a chair and opened it. Camera, seals, numbered evidence sleeves, a toolkit that didn't look like a toolkit. He put on gloves because he had been taught that you don't leave fingerprints on history, even when history leaves its hand on you. He tried the wardrobe door. It did not yield. He tried again less politely. The lock was not the sort that admitted conversation. It was a statement. He breathed out and thought about rank and trespass and bills with names like official secrets. He also thought about the line in his duty oath that mentions the crown and the people in a single breath, as if the two were not often required to take turns. Then he did something he knew he would have to explain later. He took the slim pry from the kit, wrapped its tip in felt, and worked it gently where brass met wood. The wardrobe held for another heartbeat, the way an old soldier stands a fraction longer than the parade requires, and then it let go with a sigh too soft to be called a sound. The doors parted a hand's width. Cold slid out. He expected dresses, shawls, the soft geography of silk. He expected color. What met him was darkness packed carefully into folds. He widened the opening and found a velvet wrapper, the royal shade that painters use when they are trying to make night look expensive. It was tied with a rope of braided cord that had dulled at the tassels from years of touching. He lifted the bundle. It weighed more than clothing and less than a body. Something metallic whispered within. The room made a suggestion, stopped. He did not. He placed the bundle on the chaise, untied the cord, and turned back the velvet the way one moves a curtain for a window that has asked to see the weather. The light struck cloth that answered like water. It was white, but not white. It was the color that white becomes when it has negotiated with time and won. Threads that did not know how to age. Borders that were not borders, but vows. He knew it before he understood it. Even photographs do not prepare you for the way a thing like that refuses translation. He raised the lamp and the detail woke up. Embroidery like frost that remembered being snow. The long train breathing under the smallest draft. The clasp that once sat high and heavy over a chest expected to carry a nation's projections for half a century. He did not touch it. He had been trained not to confuse duty with privilege. He stepped back, took a single frame on the camera, a documentation shot, not a photograph, and set the device down with something like apology. His mouth had gone dry. He swallowed the taste of iron and old dust. Thought arranged itself. Words arrived. Coronation Robe. His first instinct was procedural: secure, report, seal, forget. The second arrived before the first could finish putting on its shoes. Why was it here? There were places for this. Vaults whispered into existence in a registry, temperature and humidity married by engineers, a careful bureaucracy of reverence. There were logs and chain of custody forms and curators paid to argue with conservators. There were rooms built to house this sort of power. There were even rumors of rooms within rooms where the nation kept the memories it didn't know how to look at without blushing. But this was not one of those rooms. This was a wardrobe. He looked again. The velvet wrapper had an inner pocket. He slid a gloved finger inside and found a folded note. He bent to the light. The hand was not flowing, not theatrical. It was tidy, almost austere. 3 words, and a date. Keep it safe. 9.X. No initial, no name. Not the late Queen's hand. He had stood in rooms where her letters were displayed, and you do not forget a signature that has been practiced on more Christmas cards than most people receive in a lifetime. The date could have been any year. It was, in its small way, worse than a signature. It was a secret's policy, lack of identifiable features. He listened. The corridor outside was a closed mouth. He felt suddenly aware of the cameras in the ceilings beyond, the building's quiet spine of surveillance. He could be seen without being noticed. He could be noticed without anyone staying to see what he had seen. He took the cord and drew the velvet back up and around the robe, marshalling gravity into folds that pleased it. He lifted the bundle the way one lifts a slept child and returned it to the wardrobe. He could have shut the doors and walked out and written a report so boring no one would read past page 2. He didn't. He searched the wardrobe more carefully. Behind the hanging pole, a shallow cavity, no larger than a drawer that had retired from useful work. He pressed the backboard and felt a give. A small panel slid aside. Inside a tin the size of biscuits. He took it out, opened it, and found 7 objects that didn't belong to each other at first glance. A silver button, a ticket clipped and yellowed at the corners, a tiny pair of children's scissors, a photograph of a door, a handkerchief with a single embroidered initial, and 2 keys on a ring. He set them in a line, the way investigators do, not because it helps, but because it comforts. The photograph drew his eye. A door with a rope-barred handle. Above the handle, a brass plate with an incised number and a word. The word was orchard. The number was VI. He knew the naming conventions of royal houses the way you learn a city you never expect to visit. Orchard was an internal designation for a set of rooms in a part of the residence given to greenery and quiet. He had never been there. Guards posted on rotational strips learned corridors, not worlds. His radio hissed. He froze. An unrelated call. 2 units to a loading bay. He let his breath back into his chest and stood still long enough for the adrenaline to remember what it's for. He slid the tin back into the cavity and the panel back into place. He closed the wardrobe carefully, fitted the felt-wrapped pry to reverse what it had begun, and let the lock take back its pride. Then he did what he hadn't planned to do at all. He took one of the keys. It was the plainer of the 2, iron and indifferent. He slipped it into the small pocket stitched into the waistband of his trousers, the pocket nobody uses because nobody knows it's there, and he knew that he had crossed a line drawn in a room he could not name. On his way out, he paused by the dressing table. A small jewelry tray sat near the mirror, the sort of thing that collects rings that do not wish to travel. He placed the folded instruction there, as if returning change. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded slightly different from the click it had made when he entered, which is how doors tell you they have learned about you. The east corridor had lengthened while he worked. He moved down it at the pace issued to people who might need to look like they belong anywhere. He passed a custodial cart that pretended to be abandoned, and a chair that had never been sat on by anyone who understood chairs. He kept to the right, the way soldiers do when they are not in ranks. The palace watched him go with the smile it uses for tourists. Back at the security station, the duty officer glanced up lazily. "All tidy?" he asked, as if tidiness were something a man could pronounce on after 2 a.m. "All tidy," Avery said, surprised at the truth in the lie. "Paper?" the officer prompted. "In the tray," Avery replied. He had placed a report there, taut as a drum. He had not mentioned the panel, he had not mentioned the tin, he had not mentioned the robe because he had not been ordered to take inventory. He had written about hinges and locks and the integrity of doors. He had described climate conditions like a patient who did not wish to alarm a doctor. The officer stamped something that needed stamping and waved him on. "You look pale," he added belatedly. "Carpets, they steal your blood." He signed out and did not go home. Home was a small and rented place that would smell like coffee grounds and books and would have offered him the wrong sort of comfort. He walked instead along the edge of the park until the statues remembered their poses, the benches recalled their assignments, and the early buses confessed their intentions. Dawn scraped light across the palace roofs like a whetstone. He put a hand in his pocket and closed it around the iron key until it marked his palm. He waited for a noise inside his head to calm. It didn't. He took out his phone and thought about who people like him call when they cannot call anyone they know. There are numbers for that, detached from departments, funded by rumor. He did not dial them. Instead, he sent a single message to a friend he had no right to have, a journalist who knew how to keep oxygen in a sentence. All it said was, "Do you have a map of the orchard rooms?" The reply came a minute later, as if the other man had been waiting awake for trouble to remember his name. A link. A low-resolution scan of an old appendix to a fire code. Orchard VI sat in a thicket of lines, not near public tours, not near staff routes, a place that had been arranged to be reached only on purpose. He read it twice, then deleted the message. He had learned to clean up after himself. He had also learned that no one ever really does. At 10, after coffee strong enough to argue with his decisions, he presented himself at a side entrance known only by initials. A head of residence security who had never successfully looked casual nodded him into a small office that smelled of paper, lemon polish, and power rehearsing sincerity. The man gestured to a chair. "There was a routine integrity check last night," he said. Avery nodded. "Your report was appropriately uninteresting." The man's mouth pulled into a shape that might have been a smile on a kinder face. "We appreciate uninteresting." "Yes, sir," Avery said, aware of the weight of "he will." "Going forward, if you encounter any, how shall I put it, archival anomalies, you will inform me directly." "Sir," Avery said, aware of the weight of "he will." "Do you anticipate anomalies?" "In buildings like this," the man said, standing so that the conversation could be over, "we anticipate everything." Outside, in the corridor where staff moved like thoughts they hoped not to have, Avery exhaled a laugh he did not find funny. Anticipate everything was either the bravest sentence an administrator could say or the most cowardly. He could not tell which yet. He took a service stare because service stares tell the truth. He counted landings and listened to the acoustics change. He moved through an unmarked door and found himself in a smaller corridor with windows that admitted rectangles of daylight like rational arguments. At the far end, a door with a rope-barred handle, brass plate, Orchard VI. He paused long enough to give his common sense the chance to call him back. It didn't. He took the iron key from his pocket, felt the grease of time on it, and slid it into the lock. It turned without theater. Inside, the air had been forgotten by the thermostat. A dust sheet city rose out of the gloom. Chairs huddled like conspirators. A long table reduced to a hill under white. The blinds were half lowered, the sort of thing that confronts light when no human is available to arbitrate. He left the door open because closed doors changed the shape of truth. The room had its own work to show him. He moved slowly, lifting a corner of cloth here and there, letting objects announce themselves at their own pace. A pair of mirrors leaned face to face and pretended endlessness. A coat stand had faintly survived the last century's fashion for shadows. On the mantel, a line of small frames turned inward. At the back, near the window, a cabinet stood with the stubborn assurance of something too heavy to be moved and too important to be discarded. Its keyhole matched nothing on his ring. He tried the iron key because stories insist on symmetry. It did not fit. He could have left then. He didn't. He crouched and pressed the wood at the base, searching for panels that had the ambition to be doors. Something shifted, a section no larger than a book's spine. He eased it aside, a slot dark as a throat. He reached in and touched paper. He drew it out, a folder, thin, tied with tape that had lost interest in sticking. Inside, a single sheet. A black and white photograph of a robe laid out on a table, the train coiled like a river learning to pretend to be still. In the corner, a handwritten caption, graceful and small. After. He held the picture and felt the room invent an echo. After? After what? After whom? After which story that people put away because they lacked the courage to know where to store it? His radio hissed again, his own call sign, the voice of a colleague who did not like to repeat himself. "Sarge, you above ground?" "Reading a meter," Avery said. "Copy. We've got a walkthrough on East and 20. Might want to be seen looking useful." "On my way." He slipped the photograph back into the folder, and the folder back into the slot, and the slot back into being part of the room. He stood, listened, tasted the air to see if it would admit to secrets. It didn't. He closed the door behind him and walked quickly enough to look like a man with permission. The palace resumed its day without rearranging itself in his honor. He let it. He was not there for honors. At the station, he joined the line for the walkthrough, listened to the duty sergeant complain competently about radios, and nodded in the right places. He felt the key in his pocket, like a second pulse. That evening, when the daytime people vacated their postures and the building tried on its evening face, he took the long way round to the gardens. The air smelt of cut grass and money. The last of the tourists floated by the fence at a distance that protected both sides from awkward truths. He watched the orange fall out of the sky and considered the lies that wear orange best. He could put it all back. He could return the key, forget the wardrobe, conclude that a robe in a cupboard was simply logistics. He could reason his way into a version of the world that only hurt him enough to be familiar. Instead, he went home and drew a map on paper. The wardrobe, the tin, the photograph, the orchard room. The caption, "After." He wrote the 3 words from the velvet pocket at the top like a heading he had not earned. "Keep it safe. 9.ix." He underlined nothing. He circled nothing. He let the lines join in ways that did not yet look like sense. At midnight, when good men decide to sleep and bad men decide to make use of that decision, his phone trilled softly. An unknown number. He answered because the day had already decided to be difficult. "You were in the dressing suite," a man said, very quietly, very politely. "Who is this?" "A friend of the building," the man said. "Please don't do that again." "Do what?" "Open things that have been closed for reasons." "You'll have to send your reasons in writing," Avery said, surprising himself with a courage that felt borrowed. There was a pause. When the voice returned, it had lost a shade of patience. "You don't want to be the story." "No," Avery agreed. "I want to be the witness." The line died. He placed the phone face down and listened to his own breathing like a man new to instruments. The flat offered him the sad encouragement of the ordinary, the refrigerator's hum, the neighbor's plumbing, the loose page in a paperback turning itself to even out the air. He never slept well the first night of a new problem. He didn't this one. At 4, he gave up. He dressed like a man who expected to be mistaken for a jogger and walked the city till the city forgave him. He returned to barracks in time for a shower that negotiated with hot water and a coffee that negotiated with caffeine. When the shift board went up, he saw his name assigned to a post he had never held before, Orchard Security Liaison. It was either a coincidence or an answer. He decided it was both. He signed for the keys he was allowed to have and the equipment he was supposed to need. The iron key stayed in his pocket, unlogged, unremarked, unapproved. He walked into the day as if it belonged to someone who would know what to do with it, and the palace, bribed by sunlight, agreed to play along. At noon, a woman from preservation introduced herself with an accent that had been to university and a handshake that had been to field hospitals. "We've been asked to consult on a textiles audit. We were told you would open doors." "If I can," he said. "If you can't, tell me who won't, and I'll make them." He liked her immediately, which worried him. He led her through corridors that pretended not to be secret and rooms that never learned to be humble. She asked the right questions: ventilation, traffic, precedent, provenance. When they reached the Queen Consort's suite, he paused long enough at the threshold for her to know that this threshold was not like the others. "Something in there?" she asked. "Something," he said. They entered. The perfume had not given up its position. He stood to one side and let her do the work of noticing. Conservators noticed differently. They listen with their eyes. She moved toward the wardrobe without being directed. She touched the wood without skin. She breathed shallowly. "Do you have permission to open it?" she asked, manner gentle, words not. He considered lying in a way that would keep both of them solvent, but he chose another truth instead. "I can open it." "Then do," she said. He used the key he shouldn't have. The lock accepted his apology. The wardrobe sighed, again, like a soul returning to the body. When she saw the velvet, her face changed the way a face changes when it sees an old teacher. She reached for the rope, stopped herself, and turned to him. "Photograph," she said. He did. 3 angles. No flash. The light was enough. She extended the velvet brick by brick, the way you lay out a body for grief that cannot be formal. When the robe lay in the dim, the room shifted from private to historical. He watched her inspect without touching. She named materials under her breath. Thread counts, the languages of dye. She looked at the clasp and closed her eyes for a second, as one does when a note on a piano is perfect. "Why is it here?" he asked. "Because whoever placed it in the official inventory was told to record a robe, and whoever put this in the wardrobe was told to keep a promise." "What promise?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the velvet to rewrap the robe and found the inner pocket. She slid out the folded note. She read the 3 words and the date. Her mouth flattened thoughtfully. "Whoever wrote this knows the difference between hiding and storing. One is for fear, the other is for love." "Which is this?" She retied the cord. "Let's find out." He returned the wrap to the wardrobe and closed it without forcing it to pretend to sleep. The conservator took one step back, then another, as if conceding ground to a sovereign. She turned to him with a look that had learned how to be kind without being soft. "If you are asked, tell them we recommended transport to a controlled environment." "Is that your recommendation?" "No, it's my recommendation to keep it where the secret is safe." "Is that a professional opinion?" "It's a human one." They left the suite without turning around. In the corridor, she touched his sleeve in a way that asked permission to be honest. "Who sent you last night?" "I was told residence security." He held her gaze. "I think I was told a lie." "Then the building wants you to find the truth." And she did not say good luck, because good luck is either too little or too much. He watched her go and felt the day separate into before and after. He thought of the photograph with its caption. He thought of the velvet pockets plea. He thought of the voice at midnight offering friendship he had not requested. He thought of the silence in the orchard room, dignified rather than dead. The palace, which had learned to watch men make decisions without blinking, waited. Avery made one. He would follow the keys wherever they led, and he would open nothing he wasn't prepared to see the inside of himself. He put his hand in his pocket and closed it around the iron. It left a crescent in his palm, a small wound that looked like a vow. The appointment arrived on a slip of paper not large enough to be threatening. Orchard 6, 1400 hours. No sender, no seal. Just the sort of immaculate handwriting that knows how to keep a secret without calling attention to itself. Sergeant Thomas Avery found it under the rubber band on his radio, as if the device had decided to deliver courtesies along with frequencies. He turned the slip over. Blank. He held it to the window. No watermark. He looked at the clock, then at the corridor. The building pretended not to notice him thinking. He spent the intervening hours in the company of doors. He walked the east corridor and the west and the narrow servants' passage where wallpaper had learned the weight of decades of discreet shoulders. He passed colleagues who nodded with the professional friendliness of people who will remember nothing about your face until asked under oath. He signed a logbook because it asked, not because it cared. He drank from a paper cup and tasted metal and decided not to finish. At 1358, he was outside Orchard 6. At 1400, he turned the iron key he shouldn't have. The room was brighter than before. Someone had lifted the blinds half a degree. Dust made geometry in the beam. 2 chairs faced each other across the long table draped in a sheet. On the nearer chair, a parcel lay waiting, wrapped in brown paper, with a string tied once around and once across, the knot placed with almost ceremonial plainness. On the farther chair sat the conservator, the woman from preservation with the field hospital handshake. She nodded to the parcel. "For you," she said. "From whom?" "The building," she said, "which is to say from me, and not only from me." He sat. The chair had a memory of very straight backs. He looked at her and then at the parcel. "What is it?" he asked. "Context," she said, "and a task." He undid the string by turning it, not pulling it. Inside a ledger, canvas-bound, slightly warped, a bundle of photographs held together with a paper clip that had been repurposed from optimism, and a smaller envelope with his name on it in no one's handwriting. "The ledger came from a cupboard that never asked for attention," she said. "The photographs were tucked between pages near the back. The envelope was not part of the original. Someone added that later." He opened the envelope, a single card inside, the same card stock as old invitations but cut down, the corners sober. 3 words and an initial. "Trust the cloth. E." He felt his throat perform an involuntary swallow. "That could be anyone," he said. "It could," she agreed, "but it isn't." He placed the card down like a weight and opened the ledger. It was an inventory, but not the official kind. Items listed in a hand that did not belong to a clerk, dressings, ornaments, insignia. Notations that sounded like sentences. Kept by heart, left in care, returned to story. Dates without years, rooms without numbers. Proper nouns shaven down to protect people from their own knowledge. He turned forward until the edges rasped. Near the middle, Coronation Robe, after. Beneath it in smaller script, to remain within reach of the living. He traced the line with a gloved finger, a man unconsciously asserting that touch should sometimes be translations and not acts. The conservator said softly, "The ledger is a map of safe disobedience, things that would be safer in vaults, but truer here, things that belong to a function but mean more to a person." The robe was one of those. "Who wrote this?" he asked. "Several people," she said after a moment, "over years, a chain of hands." He turned to the bundle of photographs. The first was the black and white image he had returned to the hidden slot, the robe on a table, light sliding over satin like water deciding to be still. Another showed the velvet wrapper folded back, not to expose but to bless. A third was of a room he did not recognize, low ceiling, square window, an arrangement of lamps that suggested professional caution, where a pair of gloved hands were making a tiny repair at the hem where a century had caught a thread and thought to test it. He looked up. "Why me?" he said, finally voicing the thought that had trailed him all morning. "Why did the building choose a guard?" "It chose a witness," she said. "The robe is a symbol of power. Symbols die in vaults. They live in rooms. But rooms need someone to say what they saw when rooms are asked to lie." He let that sit. The building creaked agreeably, as if it too were a participant in the conversation. He closed the ledger and tied the string loosely around it. The task. She slid a small leather case across the table. Inside, white cotton gloves, a flat bone folder, a graphite pencil, and a neat stack of acid-free tags stamped with a tiny crown that had been rendered so modestly it almost apologized. "A proper tag," she said. "Not for the robe itself, for the wrapper. If the wrapper is found, it must be found as an object in its own right. The ledger notes are for people like me. The tag is for people like you." He nodded. "Who else knows about this meeting?" "No one who would admit to it," she said, and almost smiled. "This afternoon you will get a call from Residence Security asking you to attend a briefing. You will, because you are a good soldier. You will answer nothing. You will leave understanding less than you did when you arrived. Meanwhile, you and I will have done what we came to do." "What is that?" "Tell the truth what name it's using today." He stood with the ledger in the parcel because he needed to carry something to justify his legs, and left without shaking her hand because some alliances are better left in the grammar of nods. He did in fact receive the call. The briefing was exactly what she had promised, a choreography of reassurance without subject. Words like stewardship and continuity marched past a projector that did not project anything except the authority of projectors. A man in a suit that hired a tailor for his conscience asked, "Has any member of the security detail encountered unusual storage during routine checks?" The room produced a silence so dignified it could sit in Parliament. Avery kept it alive by tending it. After, in the corridor, the same man said quietly, "We don't want our people lost in the fog of stories. We prefer hallways," Avery said. "Stories have too many exits." He walked away before the metaphor could be promoted. At dusk, as the palace traded daylight for gold, he returned to the Queen Consort's dressing suite. The corridor was empty. Emptiness in palaces has texture. He let himself in and closed the door behind him because doors are honest about their work when asked kindly. The perfume had settled into sophistication again. The lamps invented sunset inside. He stood before the wardrobe longer than before, then opened it without an argument. The velvet wrapper waited, the braided cord's tassels frayed at the ends where years of liturgy and fingers had met. He loosened, folded back, breathed. The robe awaked like a lake when morning touches it. He did not reach. He set the ledger on the chaise longue open to the line that mattered, and wrote in small, neat letters along the margin, "Condition unchanged, wrapper intact, note present." He slid the tiny acid-free tag under the edge of the velvet, not pinning, not fastening, only waiting for the next pair of hands to find it and know that someone had thought about them before they arrived. He checked the inner pocket. The note was there. Keep it safe. 9.9. He replaced it. He rewrapped the robe. He closed the wardrobe with both palms, the way you end a prayer that has not asked for language. When he turned, he realized he was not alone. A figure stood just inside the dressing room door, not quite a silhouette, not quite a visitor, not a uniform. A woman, tall, carrying the posture of the hallway with her as if it were a shawl. For a second, the room forgot how to breathe. "Sergeant," she said, in a voice that had learned the royal art of making names sound like confidences. "I hope I am not interrupting duty." He took the smallest possible breath. "Your Majesty." The Queen Consort's eyes took in the room once, efficiently, then returned to him. She saw everything, he understood, all the time. She walked toward the wardrobe as if toward a portrait of someone she had known well and quarreled with often. "I asked for an audit," she said. "I received a briefing." "Yes, ma'am." "I prefer rooms to briefings," she said. "Rooms tell the truth even when they are untidy with it." She stopped at the wardrobe. reached toward the brass, then stopped the reach in midair. "I won't ask you what you saw," she said, "and I won't ask you to tell me what you think you saw. I will ask you one thing. Is it safe?" He felt the iron key in his pocket like a thought. He felt the ledger in his hand like a permission. "At this moment," he said, because soldiers operate in moments. "Yes." She nodded once. "Good." She put her hand on the door, not to open, but to say thank you. "There are objects that belong to the nation," she said. "There are objects that belong to the story we tell the nation. Sometimes they are the same. Sometimes the overlap is small enough to require faith." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to him fully, human without witnesses. "There are people," she said, "who will try to own what isn't theirs by naming it. Don't help them." "I won't," he said. She gave him a look that contained a complication he could not decode, and left the room with a drift of air that made the lamps agree with each other again. He stood still for a long time. When he moved, the moving was slight. He closed the ledger, retied the string, and lifted it with the consideration due to anything that had learned to carry history without complaining. He took the service stair to a passage no longer used for servants, and found the conservator waiting in the square of light from a window that had forgotten which court it opened onto. "Well?" she asked. He knows," he said. "She always has," the conservator replied, not as flattery, but as truth's administrative note. "Did she ask you to do something impossible?" "She asked me not to help the wrong people," he said. "That is the right impossible," the conservator said. "May I show you something?" She navigated him to a door so ordinary it seemed like a decoy. Inside, a small workroom made of clean tables, quiet drawers, and the sort of shelving that resolves arguments without raising its voice. She pulled a drawer and produced a garment smaller than a ceremony, but larger than nostalgia. A child's cloak, royal purple on the outside, white fur at the edge so pristine it looked like weather pretending to be fur. Not the robe, but its echo. Worn by a child who walked beside the woman who wore the robe, so that someone smaller would know the weight before they had to bear it. "Whose?" he asked. "It doesn't matter," she countered. "It is always someone's, and never only theirs." Then, as if answering her own question, she added, "It belonged to a girl who clapped in a gallery when the horses came around a second time, and a woman laughed and did not stop her." He felt the strange ache of happy memory that isn't yours. "What are you showing me?" "That the robe is not alone," she said, returning the cloak to its drawer as if it would dream better there. "Nothing is. We're keeping a conversation alive, not an artifact." He nodded and left with more weight than he had arrived, and less fear. In the corridor, his radio twitched. "Sergeant Avery," the duty officer said, "Resident Security would like a word regarding your night movements 2 evenings ago." "Of course," he said. In the office with lemon polish and practiced sincerity, the same man from the briefing was trying on a different tone. "We've reviewed corridor footage and noticed you entered a suite outside your usual pattern." "I go where I'm sent," Avery said. "Who sent you?" "The building," he said, and watched the man decide to be amused. He decided not to be. "You understand," the man said, not for the first time in his life, "that a palace is composed of rooms where necessity runs ahead of permission. We simply need to ensure your necessities align." Avery held the silence a moment to see if it would mature. "I was verifying the integrity of a lock," he said. "It was intact. It is intact." "Very good," the man said, as if accepting a donation in the wrong currency. "One last thing. There has been chatter." You have a background check that suggests you are inclined toward initiative. I prefer doors that open when they should and stay shut otherwise, Avery said. Let's keep it that way, the man said, and stood to end the conversation. We anticipate everything. As he left, Avery thought of the robe, which anticipated nothing and forgave much. He took the long way to the barracks, because long ways teach you things short ways do not. The city was working on being evening. He considered a pub and declined, considered a call and declined, considered sleep and declined. He walked the perimeter and counted the points at which a person could cross without authorization, then recalculated the count, because any number is a lie told to make fear sit down. At home, his telephone sat on the table like a moral question. He dialed the journalist's number, the friend he had no right to have, and ended the call before it could ring. He wrote instead, on a sheet of actual paper, 3 lines. There are 2 kinds of secrets, the kind that rot and the kind that ripen. I have found one of the latter. If you hear a story, listen for the motive attached. If it smells like fear, don't eat it. He burned the paper over the sink because the past deserves flame, and because files that don't exist are complicated to subpoena. He slept in fits. He dreamed of a corridor that looped back into itself like a crown, of a robe that breathed, of a child's laughter in a gallery, of a window that would not open, and then did. He woke at 3 and drank water from the tap and no longer minded its metallic taste. He woke again because morning had arrived and asked if he intended to play. The day brought a summons he could not ignore, an audience with someone whose title was long enough to count as a paragraph. He presented himself with a straight back and a mind that had learned not to author thoughts in the presence of people who wore carpets as if they were floors. The man was courteous, which is the expensive version of polite. I am told, the man began, that you have become a point through which information passes. I am a guard, sir. I tend to points. The man allowed himself the smallest compromise of a smile. Loyalty is a remarkable tool, he said. It builds, it defends, it also blinds. One hopes to be loyal to something worth seeing. Avery did not answer. The man continued. Certain regalia have, at times, been kept nearer to the family than to the institution. This is not a heresy. It is a tradition of sorts, not recorded, because then it would be an instruction, and instructions can be beaten to death. You are not the first to find a story folded into a wardrobe. You will not be the last. Be wise. I am trying, Avery said. Try harder, the man said pleasantly, and dismissed him with a nod that contained more history than a book and fewer solutions than a decent map. By late afternoon, the conservator sent a message that was not a message. It was a blank sheet of paper delivered by a page who believed in errands the way religious people believe in ritual. He turned the paper over and saw a faint imprint, letters pressed through from a note written on a page above it. He held it to the light and read what was not meant for anyone and therefore meant for everyone. After the bloom, keep the stem. He went to the window and watched rain walk toward the palace as if it too had an appointment. He thought of the robe and the wrapper, and the ledger and the child's cloak. He thought of the queen consort's hand hovering over brass. He thought of the key in his pocket and the finger-shaped crescent on his palm. He thought of the first time he had stood in a doorway in a war zone and learned that thresholds are where you decide who you are. He made his decision there. He would not bring the robe to a vault. He would not expose it to cameras. He would not deliver it to the appetite of headlines. He would hold the room's truth against the hallway's hunger and buy time with his own name if he had to. At 2100, he received another note. Orchard 6, now. He went alone. The room smelled faintly of dust and orange oil and a kind of seriousness that does not require audience. On the table, under the sheet, a rectangle that hadn't been there earlier. He lifted the linen, the tin. He opened it. The items inside had been rearranged. On top lay the small pair of children's scissors. Under them, the theater ticket. Beneath that, the silver button. The photograph of the door had been replaced by another of the same door, open now, a narrow slice of darkness beyond. The handkerchief with the embroidered initial had been folded to expose the monogram fully, and the second key, finer, brass, newly polished. He lifted the key. It was warm. Behind him, the door closed. The voice that spoke was the same polite midnight voice that had warned him to stop. It sounded tired now, or perhaps more honest. "Sergeant Avery, you are in the middle of something that has been carefully arranged to require no heroes." He did not turn. "If it required none," he said, "you wouldn't be here." A pause. The kind of pause that learns to be comfortable because it lives with power. "There is a page in a ledger you have not yet read. There is a sentence in it that makes people in offices afraid. Please refrain from reading it." Avery turned then. The man stood in the corridor's gray. No uniform, no badge, the sort of suit that refuses to tell its tailor's secrets. The face was ordinary in a way that takes training. The eyes were the color of decisions. "You know where the robe is," the man said. "We know where you keep your conscience. We prefer ours where we can see it." Avery held up the brass key. "What does this open?" The man's mouth did not move. "A smaller secret," he said. "And then a larger one. And then none at all, if you are wise." Avery slipped the key into his pocket with the iron one. He replaced the tin's items exactly as he'd found them, and he drew the linen back over the table as if putting a bandage on a wound that refused to look serious. "I will continue to do my job," he said. "Do," the man said. "But understand that jobs are defined by people who never have to perform them." When Avery looked up again, the corridor was empty of the man and full of the suggestion that he had never been there. He closed the door behind him without turning the key and stood in the dark for a moment to measure himself against it. He felt bigger than the dark by an inch. He took that inch and walked. Back in the dressing suite, he opened the wardrobe for the third time in a day and made no mistakes with his hands. He checked the wrapper's tag, straightened it, checked the inner pocket's note, replaced it, and then did something he had not meant to do. He tucked the brass key under the velvet fold where a future hand might find it because someone wanted them to. He wrote on the ledger, in the same small neat letters as before, wrapper tagged, note retained, second key placed with care, reason, continuity. He closed the wardrobe, he left the room, he walked to the small chapel at the far edge of the private wing because chapels are the only rooms that can be asked to listen without training. He sat in the back and said nothing. He let the day empty out of him like water finding a grate. When he rose, the conservator was in the doorway, as if summoned by the end of his deciding. "The robe?" she asked. "In place," he said. "Safer than it was, braver than it had to be." "And you?" "In the same condition," he said. "For now." She glanced at the iron key peeking from his pocket and nodded to it. "You'll need both," she said. "How many doors?" he asked. "As many as fire codes allow," she said, and smiled without joy. "But there's only one you have to open next." "Which?" She gave him a slip of paper, as small and uncomplicated as the first. "Tomorrow, 0530, Orchard Stair, Bring only your hands." He slept almost not at all, a kind of vigilant rest that soldiers learn so the morning can find them ready and not cruel. Before dawn he showered, dressed in the darker rig, and walked the corridors as if moving through a photograph. The building was at its kindest at that hour. The carpets forgot to steal your blood, the portraits looked almost human, and the clocks hummed rather than ticked. He kept his footsteps inside their own echoes. At the orchard stair, a crooked, narrow spiral that had been built as if stairs were secrets, she waited, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, a small smile like a lit match. She did not say good morning. She handed him a pair of gloves. "What is it?" he asked. "A seam," she said, and began to climb, both keys ringing softly in his pocket like a promise he had not yet made. The palace was still at that hour, when night and morning pretend not to know each other. Light collected at the edges of windows but had not yet decided to enter. The air smelled faintly of polish and stone. Sergeant Thomas Avery followed the conservator up the narrow orchard stair, each step groaning like an old confidant remembering a promise. The keys in his pocket struck each other softly, a rhythm meant for nerves. At the landing, she stopped before a small arched door, plain wood, paint dulled by years of invisible cleaning. "It doesn't appear on the new plans," she whispered. "It used to lead to a storage kraal above the northern wing. It was sealed after the renovations." She pressed her palm against the panel. It moved to fraction. "They sealed the other side, not this one." Avery removed his gloves, felt for the latch. The iron key slid home like memory finding its context. The door sighed open. Beyond it, a corridor barely tall enough for standing. Dust motes drifted in the beam of her flashlight, turning the air to parchment. They stepped inside. The walls were rough brick, mortared carelessly as if secrecy were more important than aesthetics. At the far end, a narrow archway revealed a chamber just large enough for a table and a shelf. On the table, a wooden chest rested beneath a thin film of age. Avery approached. "Same carpenter as the wardrobe," he murmured. The hinges were identical, the grain of the wood carried the same rhythm. He brushed away the dust. Faint letters emerged burned into the lid. Orchard VI Supplemental. He opened the lid. Inside were folders, bound with ribbon, their labels written in a hand that once belonged to authority. Royal Textiles, Transfer Logs, 1952 through 1953. Another folder read, Access, Eyes Only, Post-Coronation Storage. The conservator's breath caught. "These shouldn't be here," she said. "These were supposed to have been moved to Windsor decades ago." He pulled a folder free. Inside were correspondence sheets, faded carbon copies. The first letter was dated 3 days after Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. To Residence Preservation. The robe will remain under direct family custody until further notice. The official replica will suffice for ceremonial display. Beneath the signature, the scrawled initials P.H. He glanced at the conservator. "Her late husband's private secretary," she said, "which means the family kept the original robe outside the records. It was never lost, never loaned, just hidden." He turned another page. A memorandum dated 5 years later bore a new annotation in red ink. "In case of transfer of residence, keep record unpublicized. The integrity of symbolism must not be compromised." And beneath, another note, later handwriting almost illegible, "Keep it safe, 9X." He stared at the phrase, the same words as the note in the wrapper, which means this wasn't Camilla's secret, it was the Crown's, passed quietly from one caretaker to another. The robe became a promise no one wanted to break publicly. They studied the next folder, inventory photos, small negatives clipped to typewritten captions. One showed the robe spread across a table in a light too clinical for reverence. Another captured the former queen herself, or rather her reflection, visible in a mirror at the edge of the frame, watching the preservation work. Her face unreadable, her hand resting on the velvet edge. The conservator closed the folder gently, as if returning a heartbeat to a body. She wanted it protected, he said. She wanted it remembered correctly, she replied, which are not the same. He reached deeper into the chest. Under the paperwork lay a smaller box lined in faded satin. He lifted the lid and found a single brooch, gold, shaped like a Tudor rose, the enamel chipped, the clasp bent. Behind it a folded scrap of parchment, brittle as onion skin. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was delicate, looping, old ink. When the robe is worn again, it must be for grace, not for power. If that day never comes, let it rest with those who can forgive what it once required. He said softly, "She left instructions for her own legacy." The conservator nodded, and the current queen kept them near her, maybe out of respect, maybe out of fear. They replaced everything exactly as found. She took a quick set of photographs, documentation, nothing that could travel. When they closed the chest, the room felt heavier, as if the air itself were agreeing to secrecy. "Why did you bring me here?" Avery asked. "Because the story won't survive in paper. It needs someone who saw the robe with their own eyes. When they finally decide to tell the version that sells, someone has to remember the version that's true." He almost smiled. "And that's me?" She said, "It's you, because you still ask why." They left the chamber, closing the door softly. At the landing, she replaced the flashlight with a candle stub she had brought. If they notice the dust disturbed, they'll assume the cleaners did it. If they see light, they'll think it's memory. Down the stair, the palace began to awake. Distant clatter of dishes, muted radios, the world returning to schedule. By the time they reached the ground floor, the night's conspiracy had already become history. At mid-morning, the conservator was gone. No record of her sign-in, no trace on the logs. When Avery asked, the clerk looked puzzled. "No visitor scheduled," he said. "Perhaps you meant Mrs. Carter from catering." He didn't argue. He found the ledger in his locker, the one she had given him. A new line had appeared in a different hand. Orchard Supplement, integrity maintained, witness, Avery. He hadn't written it. Someone else had. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Later that day he was summoned again to the polished office. The same official leaned back in his chair, smiling the kind of smile bureaucrats keep in storage. "You've been thorough, Sergeant. The matter of the wardrobe is closed." "Is it?" Avery asked. "It is," the man said. "The robe has been relocated to an appropriate facility." "Which one?" "An appropriate one." Avery nodded once. "May I ask why it was there at all?" The man's smile thinned. "Because the past occasionally requires a guardian, but guardians sometimes forget whom they serve." He was dismissed with that. Outside, in the courtyard, rain began to fall. Not the gentle, ceremonial drizzle of photographs, but the honest kind that left stains on uniforms. He walked without cover to the guardhouse. Inside, the kettle hissed. Someone laughed at a football score. The world once again was uninterested in ghosts. That evening, when the palace lights blurred against the wet glass, Avery returned alone to the east corridor. The dressing suite door had been replaced. New lock, new brass, no marks of his prying. Inside, the air smelled of nothing. The wardrobe stood open and empty. Only a square of unfaded carpet showed where it had rested. He checked the chaise longue. On the seat lay a folded sheet of paper. You did your part. Some secrets keep themselves. See. He folded the paper, placed it in his pocket, and left the room as quietly as he had entered it the first night. At the security gate, a courier was waiting, holding a sealed package marked "Internal Delivery" for Sergeant Avery, the man said, and handed it over. Avery carried it to his quarters, broke the seal. Inside was a photograph, his own photograph of the robe, the one he had taken that first night. Across the bottom margin, in neat script, a single sentence. The crown does not hide what it loves, it hides what it fears. He set the photograph on his desk. Outside, the palace clock struck midnight. He looked once more at the image of the folded robe, at the light glancing off its ancient thread, and whispered, "Then it will always be afraid." The wind shifted through the open window, carrying the faint scent of velvet and old perfume. The paper trembled, then lay still, as if satisfied to rest where someone, finally, understood. The palace awoke the next morning with the quiet arrogance of institutions that believe themselves eternal. Rain glistened on the gates. Tourists gathered in obedient lines. The guards at the main post performed their steps with the same precision they had offered to centuries. Yet beneath the marble and ceremony, whispers moved faster than footsteps. Sergeant Thomas Avery knew before anyone told him that something had changed. His name no longer appeared on the morning duty list. His clearance badge blinked red instead of green. The locker where he kept his uniform had been emptied, cleaned, and neatly relabeled for someone else. A single envelope sat on the bench. Inside, a brief note printed without signature. Your service is appreciated. You are on extended leave until further notice. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Outside the barracks, the same car that carried senior couriers waited by the curb. The driver, a man whose uniform had never known dust, nodded once. They'd like a word at Clarence House. He climbed in, the city sliding by like a half-remembered dream. London was awake now, markets opening, buses groaning, news hawkers shouting headlines that meant less than rumors. None of them knew that somewhere behind the palace walls, a story was suffocating under its own heritage. Clarence House loomed pale and self-assured. Inside, corridors turned corners that pretended to lead nowhere important. A secretary escorted him to a room furnished not for comfort, but for composure. Bookshelves lined with unread volumes, portraits that looked elsewhere, and in the middle, a desk too polished to be sincere. Behind it sat the same man from residence security, the one with the easy smile and the empty eyes. "Sergeant Avery," he said, gesturing to a chair. Or perhaps just Mr. Avery now. Avery remained standing. "You've relieved me." "For your own good," the man said. "You've seen too much of the wrong kind of truth. It happens in this line of work." "The robe?" asked Avery. The man tilted his head slightly, as if hearing a word in another language. "What robe?" "The one in the Queen Consort's wardrobe, the one no one was supposed to find." The smile returned, thinner. "You mean the item now securely stored in the royal collection. The matter is closed." "Then why the secrecy?" "Because secrecy is what allows people to sleep at night. You wouldn't want to deprive the nation of rest, would you?" Avery said nothing. The man sighed and tapped a folder on his desk. "You will receive a transfer to a post outside London. Consider it a reward. Enjoy the countryside, Sergeant. There's peace in distance." "I don't want peace," Avery said. "I want honesty." The man leaned back. "Honesty is rarely loyal, and loyalty rarely honest. Choose which you prefer." When Avery didn't answer, the man closed the folder with a soft thud. "Good day." Outside, the rain had stopped. He walked instead of taking the car, past the park, past the gates, past the guards who nodded out of habit. He walked until the city grew quieter, until the echo of his boots stopped sounding like duty and started sounding like freedom. By dusk, he was at Althorpe, the Spencer estate, standing before the lake that mirrored clouds like secrets too heavy to drown. The conservator had told him she'd be there, and she was, waiting by the edge, her coat pulled tight against the wind, in her hands a small wooden box. "You kept it," he said. "I borrowed it, long enough to make sure it won't vanish again." She opened the box. Inside lay a single strip of fabric, the lining of the late Queen's coronation robe. The thread shimmered faintly, gold still alive beneath the years. It was only a piece, but it was enough. "I couldn't take the whole thing," she said. "They moved it 2 nights ago under inventory seal. But this was caught on the clasp, a thread of history that refused to obey." He knelt beside the box. "What will you do with it?" "I'll return it," she said softly, "but not to them." He looked up. "To whom then?" "To where it belongs," she whispered. "To the story that's still being written." Thunder rolled in the distance. Across the lake, the sky folded into night. She placed the box into his hands. "You found the truth," she said. "Now decide what to do with it." He looked at the cloth, the thread glinting like the last line of a forgotten prayer. "If I speak," he said, "they'll erase me." "If you stay silent," she said, "they'll erase her." The rain began again, soft and persistent, as if the heavens themselves refused neutrality. He stood, holding the box, and felt the weight of all that could not be said. "I can't publish it," he said. "They'd call it treason." "Then don't publish," she said. "Remember." He nodded slowly. "Memory lasts longer than power." She smiled faintly. "That's why power fears it." When she left, she didn't say goodbye. People who carry secrets don't use farewell. They just vanish at the edges of stories. Avery stayed by the lake until the rain turned silver in the moonlight. Then he opened the box once more, took out the fabric, and let the wind lift it. The thread caught the light, dancing like a ghost refusing to fade. At that same moment, inside Buckingham Palace, the Queen Consort stood alone in her dressing room. The wardrobe was gone, the wall freshly painted. Yet for a reason she couldn't name, she opened the window. The air that entered was cool and scented faintly of lavender and velvet. Far away, a piece of golden thread drifted upward, disappearing into the night sky. Weeks later, a small brown parcel arrived at the Royal Archives, no return address. Inside, wrapped in plain linen, a single embroidered tag, "After the Bloom." Attached was a note in precise handwriting. "The robe is safe. Its story is safer. The crown remembers through those who refuse to forget." No signature, no explanation, only a fingerprint, faint, smudged, human. The archivist who opened it hesitated, then placed the tag in a drawer marked "Uncatalogued" for future reference. He closed the drawer and forgot, as men are trained to do. But the scent of lavender lingered. That night, somewhere beyond the palace walls, Thomas Avery slept for the first time without dreaming of corridors or crowns. The storm had passed, but the truth remained, quiet, patient, indestructible. And in a vault, lit by a single, steady light, the late Queen's coronation robe waited, folded perfectly, as if listening for the footsteps of the guard who had once dared to open a door that should never have been opened. It waited not for ceremony, but for remembrance, because some secrets aren't meant to be hidden. They're meant to be found by those brave enough to look,